and welcome to Two-Way Talk Basketball Podcast, talking about everything basketball from both perspectives. With dual Olympian and NBL champion Mark Worthington and dual Olympian and 2 times NBL MVP Chris Anstey, hosted by sports presenters Candy Hertz and Nathan Stremple. Let's get into it. Hello, happy Friday and welcome to Two-Way Talk Podcast. My name's Candy Hertz. Hello, and we've got Nathan Stremple and Chris Anstey with us as well today. Mark Worthington, a noted miss in our group today. Of course, he's visiting his family, so we miss him, but we will talk about him. He just won't be here today. Hey guys, how's it going?
Really good. On that note, Wortho's in Cairns for Taz's birthday. So happy birthday, Taz. Hope you're having a good one up in Cairns.
Absolutely. Now, this has already been an interesting start to round 2. We've got one team in quarantine. We've got one team who has gone 0 for 36 on 3-point attempts. And we've got one team that still hasn't got a win on the board. Unfortunately for Adelaide, they're the team that are sitting in quarantine or isolation, whatever you want to call it, because of COVID. Wasn't their fault. They just left Adelaide maybe 6 hours too late. And the Queensland government, for safety reasons, of course, popped them back into quarantine until the end of this week. That's going to be tough across the board. Nate, what do you reckon these guys are doing in quarantine right now?
Well, you say unfortunately for them, they're 2-0 and watching teams getting banged up and having to play. They're going to have to squeeze games in quickly, but it might be an advantage. They come in fresh against teams that have played a bit and they might be able to run the table.
I wonder, though, they are sitting at the top of the leaderboard by accident at the moment because they're 2-0. But I wonder, though, what's going to happen, though, when they get those games back to back to back. They've already got, in the last week of the season, they've already got 5 games packed in there. They're going to have a lot of games back to back, Chris. What do you reckon?
They are. But they can be incredibly positive periods of basketball as well. There'll be no training. They'll go game to game to game, and you can really find a rhythm. But just going back to the quarantine, it really is one of those strange occurrences that I don't really understand, because the Queensland government or the South Australian government has put the team into isolation, yet they've had direct contact with the entire league by the time. So if somebody there's had quarantine, it's going to go through the league. So I don't quite understand the need for it, but there are much smarter people out there than me. We hope, of course, and there have been tests. All of the players, all of the Lightning players came back negative. Let's just get this done and get them playing basketball again. I really wanted to see. You said they're on top of the ladder by accident. I don't think it's accident, but I really wanted to see that. I wanted to see them take on the Flyers. That would have given us a really clear look at where they were. We'll get that a little bit later in the season.
Yeah, we might still get it, hopefully.
And as we do jump into games very quickly, I know you guys in Melbourne did a marathon effort, but shout out to my family and all the folks in Adelaide who are having a week of extreme lockdown. Hopefully it's 6 days.
Just on a side note, Chris, I think really it's more just to do with, if I lived in Queensland and I had to be in quarantine regardless, I think I'd be annoyed if I knew a sports team was allowed to run around and willy-nilly do what they want. So I can only imagine that plays a part in it. But we are thinking, yep, agreed, Nathan, of everyone in Adelaide. And, of course, the girls up in quarantine too. Let's get straight into the games. We don't have as many because, of course, a whole bunch of them have been postponed. But our first game that we did have was the Caps, who took on Bendigo. It was a low-scoring game, 76-56. Michaela Roof coming off the bench with 11 points and 10 rebounds. Special mention to Carly Ernst, ending the night on a double-double with 15 points and 10 rebounds. Straight into the next game, which was Perth v Melbourne. Now, the only way to start this conversation today is, oh my God, Boomers, what happened to your 3-point shot? They got donuts for 20 attempts, but somehow they did still manage to sneak the win. In fairness, both teams had pretty high turnover rates, with Perth turning over the ball 21 times and Melbourne 17. Plus, 2 star players were missing from the game, Katie Ebzery for Perth and Tess Madgen for the Boomers. Now, the game started pretty slowly for the Boomers, whereas Perth came out energetically and were in the lead by 13 at the end of the first half. But after some adjustments, Melbourne gradually cut that margin down and turned the deficit into a 5-point lead heading into that final term. The final score, a low 62-56. Kayla George scored 25 of those 62. And after the game, the Boomers were 3-0 for the season. Chris, both teams tried to take care of the ball, but had a bit of trouble doing that this game. Melbourne seemed to do a slightly better job capitalising off the turnovers. They had 22 points of turnovers compared to 9 from Perth. Can you talk us a little bit through points off turnovers? Does that actually mean anything? And what does that mean for the game?
It does. It means a lot. And the thing, and there's so much statistical analysis in basketball these days, but what we know as coaches and what we know now as professional athletes is that the highest likelihood you have of scoring the basketball is when you have a numbers advantage. Now that seems really simple. 1-on-0, 2-on-1, 3-on-2, 4-on-3. And that's what live ball turnovers create. They create an opportunity for the defense to get out in the open court, usually with the numbers advantage, and shoot the ball at a much higher percentage. Now, in a game like that, especially where the Boomers were shooting the ball horribly from the three-point line, those easy baskets, the uncontested layups in transition were gold. You mentioned that, of course, they fell down 13 points. Off the top of my head, they might have only scored 10 or 11 points in the third quarter, but Perth couldn't put them away. And it's a real sign at that stage of this round as to how good a team the Melbourne Boomers are. And they're able to win when their skill level isn't as high as what it should, because they defend, they don't take possessions off. Guy Malloy has a great system in place there. But, you know, for Perth to score 56 points and not be able to take advantage of an opposition that went 0 from 20 from the three-point line, again, I don't think they'll have another opportunity like that. And I think it really shows the difference in the quality of those two teams. One more point to make before we move on, or before, Nate, you have a word. It also showed offensively how much the Boomers depend on Tess Madgen. Maddie Garrick stepped in and she looked a little rusty. You know, one of her threes might have missed 3 feet left when she was open. She needs more minutes. She needs a little bit more consistency. And I think any team in this league to win, and win when it matters, can't have a dependency on one player. And the Boomers just need to be sure they don't depend too much on Tess Madgen on the offensive end.
Well, I was going to raise that as a positive to see Maddie Garrick come in and play some. Maddie Garrick's world class. She's an Australian 3x3 player. She's made Opal squad. So to see her get some touch, and on a side note, just want to give her a shout out on what she's doing with the Baller Beats. Foot Locker's come on board supporting women and creativity using basketball and dance. I think it's great. If you haven't seen at Baller Beats on Instagram, check out what Maddie Garrick's doing there. But to see Maddie get some buckets, get some touch, that's important for the Boomers' depth. I want to focus more on the length. Have they missed an opportunity there? We see Sharp and Edwards, and we're going to see it with all the teams with no imports. We're getting to see players that don't play too much. But is there an opportunity there where you would have liked to see Katie Ray Ebsbury come in and they could have taken one off the Boomers? And if they're scratching for a top 4 spot, dropping that one could be important.
It was a huge opportunity missed. Alex Sharp was by far their most consistent player, 15 and 13. But to duck back onto Maddie Garrick for a second, when I said she was rusty, that's exactly the type of game she needs. They need to get her going. And Wertho mentioned in the first episode that he believed the Melbourne Boomers have better depth than the Southside Flyers. I think the thing we'll see with the Boomers, and we'll talk about the Flyers soon, is that Guy Malloy gives greater opportunity to his bench in more meaningful times throughout the game. And so we saw that in this game. This was a game that Melbourne needed to win. Guy Malloy went deep into his bench early. They didn't have any standout performances, but they grinded out a win again. That's one that definitely went missing for Perth. If they can't beat a quality team when they do that, it's hard to see them beating a finals contender.
On that note, Nate, how cool is Maddie Garrick in general? Her content, her TikToks, her Instagram, that dance that she's done for Foot Locker. I would never be able to do that. She's just talented and on the court and clearly off the court as well. I would give anything to be as cool as she is. She's amazing. The next game that we had obviously was postponed. It was the Flyers and Adelaide. So hopefully we'll see that game pop up some other round that's still coming up. Up next was Townsville versus Sydney. Now, the Fire is the only team this season with a somewhat home court advantage. And there were some expectations when they took to the court in Townsville for the first time on Tuesday night. Nadine Payne started off strong, leading the charge with 11 points in the first quarter. But then both the Flames and the Fires traded shots right up until Alison Schwagmager-Belger got the sweet 3 with less than 3 seconds on the clock, turning it into a 1-possession game. In the end, Townsville finished the game on top 81-78. Lauren Nicholson continues to put them away for her team with 17 points. Standouts in Sydney was Lauren Scherf and Allison as well, with a combined score of 48 of the 78 Sydney points scored. And props to Annalie Maley as well, double-double with 10 points and 14 rebounds. Chris, this is probably the closest contest we've seen this season so far, and possibly now 2 weeks in, we're going to see teams matching up like this a little bit better. What do you think?
I think that's exactly right, and your point's correct. It was the best contest that we've seen so far, and I found myself evaluating the game a little like you did as we watched, Candy, that Alison Schwagmeyer got going late in the game and nearly dragged Sydney back from that deficit or the hole that they dug themselves in. Lauren Scherf turned up, and that was the absolute best game she's had, and I think that's why she's been frustrating over the last number of years, because 25 points and 9 rebounds, and she was physically dominant in that game. We want to start seeing that from her every single game. It doesn't have to be 25 points, but it needs to be that presence on both ends of the floor. But as much, and Annalie Maley she's so fun to watch. She's almost out of control at times. I've never seen a player end up on the floor so often, but all we've done is spoken about Sydney. And this game should be about Townsville. Shyla Hill and Lauren Nicholson were outstanding again and are fast becoming one of the most consistent backcourts in the WNBL. And for Shyla to be doing that, especially at 19 years old, we've spoken about what she's able to do physically, but she's leading a team. She's running offenses. The team's dependent on her and what type of shots they all get. And as much as anything, she's fearless. So they worked and earned themselves a double-figure lead. And for the first time right in those last few minutes, we just saw a few nerves creep in front of I believe this was their first game in Townsville, in front of a slightly bigger home crowd. We saw a little bit more emotion. They just tightened up a little bit right at the end and nearly let Sydney back in. But credit to them, the lead was big enough. They held on. All credit to Townsville, and in particular, their backcourt, which is, again, becoming one of the better backcourts in the WNBL.
And I want to come back to where you talked about home. We see somewhat of a home court advantage. Shannon Seaborn came out and played it down, saying that with everyone in the hub, it's a little bit less because people usually come to Townsville and have to acclimatise. But they're still going to play 8 of their remaining 11 games in that Townsville stadium in front of full crowds. So a game gets close down the stretch. It's pretty handy to have a crowd getting right behind you. Chris, I want to come back to you on that backcourt. You mentioned Shyla, and there'd be some schools that would say she's had this in her the last couple of years possibly and hasn't been able to play her position. So it's great to see her giving us a glimpse of the great player that she will be for Australia. But tell me where you're rating Lauren Nicholson at the moment. You've been around the league a bit more, and I mentioned as we started this season that not to sleep on Townsville. Where do you rate her in that Opals conversation?
Highly, and right in the conversation. Correct me if I'm wrong, but did she win Most Valuable Player of NBL 1 in Victoria last season? I think she may have. But so we saw what she was able to do. She was given absolute free license, but she's got a mature head on her shoulders. She gets on the rim fantastically well. She shoots the 3 ball with confidence. She must go into that Opals conversation. And while we're still on Townsville, Shyla Hill, if we take a couple of steps forward, she'll be on the Opal squad. She has to be. And I'd be fascinated to speak to Shane, and we never want to pile too much pressure on young players. We've just gone and had a look at the NBA draft. Shyla Hill gets drafted to the WNBA next season. On this performance and what she's doing, she's a WNBA player with tremendous upside, and I just think that's a given with how good she's proven to be against pros.
Well, when you say pressure, it's Shyla, as we talk about WNBL players of the future, my daughter just popped her head in. So shout out to Emily just crashing on my screen before. But that's in Shyla's plan. She's an elite athlete. She obviously, we know about her dad's career, and she knows next year's her WNBA draft year, and she's been building towards this for a couple of years, and it's exciting to see how she's heading in that direction.
Now, we like to keep everyone accountable this season, especially you, Chris, when it comes to making sure we're pronouncing things correctly. So I could have had this conversation in our little pre-chat, but I saved it for here kind of specifically. Alison Schwagmeyer-Berger. That's the name that I have written down, and that's the name that one person in the commentary team said, and then the other one just said Alison Schwagmeyer. What is it, guys? Which is the right way around?
I think it's the way. I think we need to ask her if she's going with her full married name, I suppose. I mean, we've always known Alison Schwagmeyer.
Nah, she's just Swaggy B, really.
There you go.
Yeah, right.
And speaking about accountability, I was going to come to it if you didn't, Chris. You called out the conditioning that Lauren Scherf didn't come into the season. I love you keeping people accountable if they're subpar, but then coming back and giving them raps when they step up. And that was a great game from Lauren Scherf.
And I'm glad you mentioned we had a new little baller joining us on screen with Emily as well. You know what, guys? We're at home. This is 2020. Zoom happens in our real lives. So, oh well, it's lovely to have her pop her head into the screen as well. Let's move to the next game, guys. It was Melbourne v Caps. This was the 2-time defending champion Caps coming in hot, won the match against the Boomers, giving them their 3rd consecutive win. Now, there are just 2 words coming out of this game. I know you two are in love with this girl, Jade Melbourne. In what was only her 4th game, she scored a game-high 20 points and set the tone early for her team, the 13th of those points in the first half. Boomers had been a little slow getting their games going, and this game was the same, with the Boomers trailing 19 to the Caps 31 in the first half. But worse than that, between this game and their last game, 36 is the number of donuts the Boomers have had for 3-point attempts. 36. Their 2-point shooting percentage was a lot more acceptable at 46%, with the team sharing the love around. Only one player was in double digits. The Caps brought the defensive pressure and ended the game with a 17-point difference. Boomers 50, Caps 67. How disappointing. That is not how I expected this matchup to end up. Now, the Boomers threes are inconsistent. They had 16 threes in round 1 against the Flyers. They're now 0-36. What's this change up about, Chris? Do we think it's got to do with fatigue, or do we think it's got more to do with people actually knowing how to play against the Boomers, or is something else going on?
The Boomers' 3-point shooting isn't inconsistent. It's completely consistent. Bad. They haven't made a shot in their last 36. Now, there are 2 trains of thought here with shooting. Guy Malloy, I promise you, will continue to encourage his players to shoot open threes. And I can guarantee they'll be on the training floor shooting game-like 3-point shots. But I haven't seen a poor shooting stretch like that, or a number of 3 points attempted without a make that I can remember in my basketball career. I'm sure they've been out there, and I'm sure somebody will send us a message to give me a longer streak of misses. But you know, it was building up, and that weekend from beyond the arc for Melbourne was really bad. But Jade Melbourne, you're absolutely right. She was a standout, and Jade's been a player I've seen a lot of over the last 3 years. She's played a lot with my daughter, both for Victoria and for Australia. She's one of the hardest working kids. She's grounded in the country. She played down at Latrobe. And I'll be honest, when I saw that she'd signed with Canberra, I thought she'd sit in a very similar role to Paige Price, where they'd find spot minutes for her. She'd contribute, she'd work her butt off, and she'd come in and out of games late. You know, she was starting game 1. She's top scored for them their last 2 games. And I mean, if I'm Arizona State University, where Jade's committed to go next year, I'm just watching this, rubbing my hands, thinking we're getting a ready-made pro into college. She's a lovely young girl. She's a professional athlete already. I couldn't be happier for Jade Melbourne. And also, let's make sure we acknowledge that, of course, Canberra must have instilled a confidence, and Coach Goris has instilled a confidence in her and allowed her to be who she's going to be. But I'll tell you what, for me, one of the more pleasant surprises in the WNBL season, and in a win as well. It's one thing to have 20 in a loss, but have 20 in a win against a quality basketball team. Great game.
Yeah, 20 against Opal's guards, against your Garricks and Madgens. I want to make a couple of points on Canberra, not to sleep on them, because we were bullish at the start of the season around bullish is not the right word. We talked about that they lose 2 world-class guards with no imports, that Apupa's not back and Kia Nurse is not back. But this is the beauty of this season. These young guards step up. Great game for Jade Melbourne. But Maddie Rochi's been excellent all season. So in terms of their backcourt, those young guards stepping up are making them a real threat. Because on the other side of the coin, their front court, Michaela Roos, elite. She came into the league as an import. I clearly remember her first season, her and Ebbsbury carrying a Sydney team past Penny Taylor and Cappy Pondexter at the Rangers and knocking them out in the playoffs. So Ruth's been great wherever she's gone. And then you've got Griffin and Tolo returning to form. So that front court of the Boomers of George and McBeagle was legit. And the Caps were able to go past them. So the defending champs, I don't think have any intention of letting that title go lightly.
Griffin just balances that group. She's nowhere near fit. She's nowhere near at her peak. She'll ease her way into this season, if I can use that word, in a positive way. But they're a different team with her on the floor. They're more composed. They make better choices. Everybody around her gets better shots. And she's already, you can see, she's a great positional defender. She knows where to be on the defensive end. So certainly a team that's going to continue to get better as she improves.
On the other thing about Griffin, she's just a proven performer under pressure, 2-time finals MVP. So if they can make it to the 4, if Griffin can get fit as it comes down to the business end of the season, watch out for the Caps.
Bendigo v Perth was the next game. Game 6, the only 2 teams in the league with 0-3 record facing each other. And tick, Perth finally now have their win against Bendigo. They are the only team now, Bendigo, with 4 L's next to their name. Top scorers were Katie Edzeri with 24 and Carly Ernst with 28 points and 10 rebounds. Next up, we had Flyers versus Townsville. Now, this is the good thing for the Flyers. They did actually manage to have a bit of a rest. So in a round where scores have been low, Liz and the Flyers came out and showed us who's boss. She scored a huge 31 points and quietly 13 rebounds and 6 blocks as well. It's no surprise that the Flyers won when you take one look at their starting 5, a full Opals outfit, including Jenna O'Hare scoring 18 points and Leilani Mitchell 15 points and 8 assists. And with 30 team assists as well, they really did share the ball around this game too. We did see that Townsville did rest a player with Nadine Payne on the bench this game. I think we might be seeing that a little bit more as the rounds go on back to back. We all know the offensive potential of the Flyers, but Chris, is their defensive energy good enough as well?
No, it was horrible. And we know how talented the Flyers are, but as we watch them, they switch everything in their man-to-man defense. It's a very passive switch. They're allowing the opposition the type of shots that they want to take. They're not disruptive at all. The one thing that we see as coaches, and when we sit and watch the game, once you defend the basketball, you need to stay engaged on the defensive end. Jump to the ball, go and help the next pass. But every single one of the Flyers, the minute any of their players defended the ball and it moved, they stood upright and stopped playing. And there were driving lanes everywhere for Townsville. They're too good on the offensive end. Liz Cambridge had her 31, but the interesting part as well, another interesting column on the box score, when Southside built their lead in the first 2.5 quarters, when they got up 13, 14 points, Liz was a -3. So that the Flyers were actually 3 behind when Liz was on the floor and 16 ahead in the 7 or 8 minutes that she wasn't. So, and Liz can dominate every possession if she wants to, but still takes so many possessions off on the defensive end. That's scary for the league, because when she decides to play defense every possession, she'll dominate that end as well. She's going to get her double-figure rebounds. She's bigger and stronger than everybody, but the defensive urgency needs to improve for the Flyers, and it will. Cheryl Chambers will absolutely make sure that happens. But it's interesting, as we've talked about the talent, Nate. Oftentimes the best offensive players aren't the best defensive players, and I think that's what we're seeing on Southside a little bit. But last point for me before I move on, Nadine Payne resting, without being behind their coach's closed doors, I think that's a bit of I think it was great philosophy. I don't think the Townsville would have beaten the Flyers with Nadine. They need to make sure that they win the games that they should win. So they probably looked at the schedule. Probability says they'll lose this one. We'll rest our veteran star. We'll get her back fresh for the games we know we need to win and not bang her up in a loss.
I think Nadine Payne would enjoy being called a veteran. I think she's still sort of young enough that she wouldn't like veterans.
So she's been around the league, and she probably...
Yeah, no, I hear. Well, if you compare her to Shyla Hill, she's a veteran, and she's a touch older than Lauren Nicholson, I think, too. But I I did want to ask that question. You think it's good philosophy? And this season's, it's almost like a tournament philosophy where you're managing your players, trying to get the best out of the games you need to get and juggling your strategy to make it to that 4 and be in the best position to play World Cup finals. Because I was going to ask that if that is the chink in the armour or the Achilles heel of the Flyers, is that a case where you need to have all your players playing, and if they're defensively weak, can you try and steal one? Because we've said we think the Boomers will be there, the Flyers will be there come playoffs. I think the Caps will too. So if there's one remaining playoff spot, is it going to be stealing a win against the Flyers? It could be the difference between you getting in and making it ahead of someone else.
Or not dropping one against a team that you're in the battle with. I think you can probably assume that the Flyers will win most of the games that they play. So what you don't want to do is have a game against the Flyers, play your starters huge minutes trying to win and end up losing by 10, but be really competitive, but be so beat up the very next night or 2 nights later in a game that you should win, or a 50-50 contest that it actually costs you the game. So there are 3 reasons that you rest players. The first one is the medical staff says that the player just needs a rest. It's the right thing to do, and it doesn't matter who your opponent is. Good teams rest players in games that they know they'll probably win anyway. You know, we'll rest Liz because we know that we can beat Bendigo anyway. But the other one, of course, as we've just mentioned, is if you feel like you might be up against it and in all likelihood lose a game anyway, rest your stars and freshen up for the games that you need to win. So it's going to be interesting to see what philosophy the coaches employ.
Let's have a look at the ladder where we're at, guys. We are halfway through round 2. And we do know that, like we spoke about earlier, accidentally, lucky for them right now, Adelaide are sitting right on the top. Caps, Boomers, Southside Flyers, and Townsville straight under that. Poor Bendigo sitting flat bang at the bottom with no wins on the run yet. Any thoughts on the ladder so far, guys?
It's starting to take shape. I think, Nate, to your point, I think Canberra find a playoff spot at the end of this. They're going to continue to improve. They're 3-1. They're sitting in the top 4. I can't see anyone bumping them out. For me, I think Townsville probably and Adelaide are the 2 teams that will fight out that 4th position. It's going to be really interesting to see how COVID affects these groups. But no surprises yet. I'm fascinated to see what it looks like in a week's time when we've got another 2 or 3 games each under our belt.
That's the thing. Give it another week. It's still fairly early.
Or it doesn't need to be a week, just the rest of this week, really. One quick thought, though, on the ladder, though. Chris, when we talk about Adelaide, we spoke about this, you and I, the other night. What's going to happen if they can't pick up those games? What will happen to their scores?
That will be a league decision. And what we may very well see, and I'm guessing, is that they'll decide to finalise the ladder based on the percentage of wins that you have. Now, if that's the case, they're doing fantastically well. They're sitting at 100 right now. But if they do end up playing 4 or 5 games less, that's my guess. I don't know. Maybe we'll wait to see what happens with COVID. We'll put a call in to Paul Maley and we'll see if we can get an answer.
Absolutely. Now we are going to move straight on to our 2-way topics. First topic is all about imports. We've now, again, we're already 20 games in the last week and a half. And are you liking what you're seeing with no imports in there and the chance for especially some of our younger players to actually get a run on? Or do we think the league is kind of lacking a bit of oomph without imports? Chris, what do you reckon?
It's a tricky one. It's never as good without your most talented players. And that's why we bring imports into any Australian basketball league, is to increase the level of talent within the group. I don't think every team hasn't gone let's bring in young kids. Some brought in veterans. Now, it's only an opportunity for these young players if they play. So there are still a lot of young players out there not playing many minutes. It's a hard one. The level's never going to be as high. We're going to have exposure. We might not have seen Jade Melbourne or known what Jade Melbourne was capable of if Canberra had the backcourt they had last year. She may have been buried on the bench playing 5 minutes a game. So there are absolute highlights. There are other players, other teams as well, who've brought in veterans, brought in young kids. They're not quite up to it yet. But you know what I will say is, being around it for any 18, 19-year-old young lady, to be around a professional environment, a 6-week pro, almost tournament-style season, they'll get a lot from the experience. They'll learn what it means to be a professional. Whatever it is that they take from this 6 weeks, I always say they need to then go and apply it to whichever basketball club they represent when they leave the bubble, and make sure they perform at the level as they've observed for these 6 weeks, and not go back to the level they're at before they got there.
And we've talked about it already. You just mentioned Jade Melbourne, but I think the biggest example is we get to see Shyla Hill run a team. Now, maybe Shannon would have had that faith in Shyla anyway, but if you have imports, often the trend is you bring in an import guard and often an import point guard. So how great to see Shyla at her age run a team ahead of where we may not see her in the league for years following if she does have a long WNBA career. Who knows where it goes there. So great to see her running a team and doing it really well. So that's the positive. Of course, we'd love to have imports.
Absolutely. It sort of, isn't it interesting already? It almost goes without saying when we don't mention Shyla in that conversation. She's been in the league. This is her 3rd season now. I think she would have started on any WNBL roster or not any, maybe not the Flyers, but maybe she's a WNBL starter, whether there are imports or not.
Next topic, guys. We're already seeing fatigue creep in with these back-to-back games. Our players are just starting to really feel it up there, especially in the heat as well. I feel for them with the density of the weather up there. But with regards to back-to-back games, it's something that we haven't really seen here in Australia, but it's obviously how the rest of the world plays it. Chris, you've got so much experience with this. What does it mean for these girls if they're playing back-to-back games? How do they, aside from the ice baths and the massages, how are they actually going to, what do they do between games?
How sick of hearing that question answered after a game are we? It's every single time the game finishes, what are you going to do to recover? We know they're going to stretch. We know they're going to eat well. We know they're going to get in an ice bath. Everyone in our under 14s do that now. But hey, if they're struggling, they didn't do enough in the off season. And we can see that you don't get to a season and hope to get better. Your improvement comes in the off season when nobody's watching. Too many players in this WNBL league came into this season unprepared. They will be the ones who struggle and fall off. There'll be some natural improvement. But if back-to-back bothers you, you didn't work hard enough. What I would always say about the more games we play, the less we train, and oftentimes it is easy to speak from your own experience, but the teams that I've coached in tournament play, the teams that I've been a part of when I used to play a million years ago, they were the periods of time that brought our team together, because it was game to game to game. You'd recover from a loss quickly. You'd make your improvements in real time in game situations, and they were fun. And if you can't get through a 40-minute game 2, 3, 4 nights in a row, then you're probably not a pro. But I think we'll find the pros really take a big step ahead here and manage it really well.
Your insight's so good on that, Chris, because the NBA, and I remember talking with some of the NBL guys when it was starting to head in this direction, and we went from, instead of games being all on the weekend, it was a few years ago, and they're like, players want to play. You'd much rather play a game than have an extra game a week rather than an extra training a week. But the NBA, you're playing, then you're on a plane that night, you're landing in the city at a weird hour of the morning, then you're playing the next night. In terms of, can you just take us back to your experience when you were rolling around in the NBA?
You don't get your extra shots at training. You get them before the game. We would arrive 1.5 to 2.5 hours. There are always at least 2 buses that went to a game, an early bus and a late bus. And we get there and we'd get our 400-500 shots up. If we weren't playing many minutes, it was an incredibly intense workout. Any player that didn't play, we had a 20-20 rule that any player who played 20 minutes or less in any particular game had to do a 20-minute cardiovascular workout before they got on the aeroplane, so that the players who didn't get their conditioning in the game didn't fall behind those who didn't. But the hardest thing in the NBA is if you're not in the rotation for a period of time and you miss 4 or 5 games, you actually don't have a scheduled training session. So players who are playing games, it's the best way to improve. You need to replicate that somehow. So my advice for any of the young girls out there who are playing limited minutes, forget your training time. You need to go and find your own time to do the type of work that your teammates who played high minutes in the game played. Simple as that.
And definitely pop it up on social media, like let's say Bet Cole does, so that you can intimidate everyone else as well with how intense your training has been. She was unbelievable during lockdown. So I think that's a good tip by her. Put it up there and make everyone else, accountable as well.
Isn't that the new rule of weights? If it's not on social, it didn't happen.
If it's not on social, you didn't lift them. It's the same as everything else. If you didn't take a picture at the bar, you didn't go, which is sometimes a good thing. The next big news, of course, this week, guys, the collective bargaining agreement was signed, first time in 41 years. A few years ago, they fixed a little bit. Well, they started fixing the minimum wage. Now they've lifted it again. Women have maternity leave. There's some great healthcare options in there as well, and just other conditions in general have really been taken into account. This was so important and so needed. Chris, what does this mean for the players now?
It means that the girls can start becoming professional. We're always going to have a conversation about equality in any sport. This gives the girls an opportunity to invest the time required to improve at the required rate. It's been a really interesting one, and I heard somebody mention it a while ago, and I thought it was a fascinating insight, is that, and they were talking about the AFL women compared to the AFL, and they said the AFL women can't jump in and compare themselves to the AFL today. They need to jump in and compare themselves to the AFL when it was 5 years old. The men used to work jobs, they did trades, they trained twice a week. It took them, how old's the AFL? 100 odd years old. It took them a lot of years to get to where they are. So it's going to be tough, and we can't just jump straight into equality, but this collective bargaining agreement is a fantastic step to allow the girls the resources, the time, the ability to invest in themselves to improve their game.
And I just want to give a shout out to Jacob Holmes, who, as a former player, came in and has been instrumental in setting up the Players Association and running that. And now Laura Hodges, four-time Olympians, involved there as well to help in regards to championing the cause for the women. So good. And one of the key parts of it is allowing proper maternity leave for the women so you can aspire to be a professional athlete. I had a conversation with Laura last season, and she was the only mother playing in the league. Wouldn't it be great if we see more mums, players able to have children, then come back and play? Especially as we sit in this moment right now, Chris, your daughter's going to be in the league in the future, and we're talking about Heel. We talked about Giddy last week. We talked about him soon. You've mentioned the Frolings playing in the league, Blitzarves, these sons and daughters of great players. Wouldn't it be great if these great players could have children and then return to playing? And know they could do that without having to choose one or the other.
That's it. It shouldn't be a choice. It should be both. It's as simple as that. And hey, don't forget, and this is one that's always been close to my heart, having been a single father for a long time, is that, my kids used to run around the practice court, come to press conferences. They were just a part. They went wherever I went. So absolutely, we cannot, should never have penalised female athletes for wanting to be mums. Simple as that. They can do both. And as long as they have the support around them, which is something else that this collective bargaining agreement and the bubble has provided, then absolutely the more little feet we see running around at press conferences on the side of courts, the better the sport's going to be.
Thank you, guys.
And while we're at it, you've mentioned a couple, Nate, but a couple of people who've been instrumental in the collective bargaining agreement behind the scenes. Greg O'Neill is somebody who heads up that Players Association and has been an incredible supporter of all forms of basketball in Australia. He has been massive in that. And Dr. Peter Gibbs, who's one of the best psychologists I've ever come across, he'll never say a word publicly, but to have two people of that business and academic caliber driving it for Jacob to be the face of has been absolutely incredible. So I wanted to make sure we didn't miss those two guys too.
Really fair. And while we mentioned kids running around the sidelines, congratulations, Sammy Whitcomb, mother
absolutely.
to a boy.
And while we mention great people in basketball with kids running around, Nate, who knows, Emily, who's been wanting to pop her head into this screen the whole time, could also be someone who's going to benefit from this CBA in the future. So, don't exclude yourself from that conversation too. We're going to move straight on to the final play. And of course, yesterday, the NBA draft, I have to say, it was the first time I sat and watched the whole thing. I've never done that before. And I loved it. Every second. It was exciting. It was emotional. And of course, from an NBL perspective, which is where we're moving to now in our final play conversation, they would be just rubbing their hands together with their next stars, LaMelo Ball and RJ Hampton. LaMelo being pick number 3, RJ pick number 24. What an exciting moment for our league, as well as for, of course, these young men as well. Chris, how cool was it to see those two do so well yesterday?
It was a great advertisement for our league. It's great to see highlights of our league on draft day. It's great that our league is continually being recognised as a genuine alternate pathway to the NBA for young players who don't want to go the college route. And of course, the other one, and just to demonstrate the difference in pathways, getting the same result. Josh Green went from Australia and went through high school in America, went to the University of Arizona and was drafted at number 18 to the Mavericks, which of course is a draft pick and a place that's very close to my heart. So my hope on draft day was interesting, was that he got to Dallas at pick number 18. My hope for Josh Green is that the Dallas Mavericks fans get to enjoy Josh, and Josh gets to enjoy the Mavericks in the city for a lot more years than what I did.
Well, as you know, Chris, Dallas is a great city, so a great pathway for Josh Green. And we also add in there Justinian Jessup going at number 51. He'll be a next star for the Hawks again this season. So a great draft for the NBL.
It was such fun to watch. And the other thing, I'm going to just double check that our tech guy grabbed this for me. But the other thing that I found interesting, as someone who hasn't got the years behind me like you guys do watching this sort of stuff, it was a totally new experience for me. There was a little bit of audio that played whenever the commissioner came on. I don't know, Brad, if you've got this audio ready for us. Hopefully in a moment he'll play it. And I just want to ask you guys, there's some history with this audio, or what is it? Have you got it, Brad? Okay, so every time the commissioner took the stage, this audio played it, and it gave me a giggle every time. Is that audio some special NBA audio, or is that just someone having fun? What is it, guys?
It's historical. It's what they've always done when there's been a draft selection received or submitted, and that's what you heard when David Stern walked out as commissioner, and that's what you hear when Adam Silver walks out as commissioner. Okay. And verbatim, and it's such a wonderful thing for those men to hear, with the 15th pick of the 2020 NBA draft, whichever NBA team selects, and to hear your name is just an incredible moment for those kids. And you see, and you mentioned the emotion, Candy, what it means to some of those, not only the athletes, but their families and friends and college programs or NBL programs. It really is a big moment.
Chris, on that note, and with the synergy of Josh going at number 18 to the Mavs, as you did several years ago, can you take us back to that moment for you when you went in the draft? You talk about it for family and NBL clubs. How did it go for you? I actually just wrote a story about it. I've done a lot of writing in ISO, and if anyone is bored and hasn't read it, facebook.com/Chris Anstey 13. But I wrote about it, and I went through the build-up, and I won't tell the whole story, but the intensity of the evaluation that you feel like you're under, or the scrutiny that you're under with every practice session, every game, everything you do on the sideline, it becomes really, really intense. And I suppose as much as anything for me, it was excitement, but I hadn't grown up with the sports. I was a little bit different to a lot of the players, where it was actually relief. And I didn't expect to be drafted at 18. All I knew going into the draft was that I was going to be selected at number, I think it was 29 back then, the last pick in the first round by the Chicago Bulls. Now, that would have been incredible as well, to go and play with Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen and all these guys. But so to get picked early was a surprise. And the other emotion that I didn't expect to feel but did was guilt. And by that, I was new to the sport. Sam McKinnon's in the room with me, Frank Drimick's in the room with me, Jason Smith's in the room with me, plus all of the older teammates. And I wasn't even close to being the best player on the Southeast Melbourne Magic at the time, yet here was I getting this incredible opportunity, a contract worth millions of dollars. And in that moment, as much as relief, I felt guilt. But Gorgon was always great with that. We'd lifted weights before we went. The whole team came. My family came into a room at the Channel 10 studios in South Melbourne, who streamed it in for us. I did a little bit of press, and we went and trained. And we trained for 2.5 hours, and there was just this incredible vibe at training. It was free, and it was relaxed, and it was almost celebratory. So I'll be forever grateful for the way that my teammate and the club supported me through it. And it sounds like a weird thing to say, but it really was
special, or that they made it special because I did feel a little bit guilty that I'd been given that, not others who I thought were better players than me at the time.
Well, mate,
Chris,
thank
that
you.
is like, sorry, Nathan, I think we're going to say the same thing. That was the most amazing insight.
I was just going to say thank you for what you did. Like, I was talking to someone about the draft yesterday and said, what do you think about Josh Green? He said, well, it's almost just commonplace. I'll call him my name. Just talking to Liam Santa Maria about it. And Liam's like, well, it's just almost expected to have Aussies drafted in the first round now. But Chris, you were the one pioneering that. So thanks for the path you carved for Australian basketball that's coming through.
I don't think it's always nice to do something, and probably more in retrospect than no one's ever done before, but that was just my pathway. There were a lot of Australians in the league. Well, not a lot. There were a handful of Australians in the league before me. It's Luke Longley who we should be thanking. He was the one who not only got to the NBA, but succeeded in the NBA. And granted, he's a big, strong man, and a little bit, as I got to know Luke, saw the game similarly to me, and that it didn't mean everything to him. Self-improvement and enjoyment and working hard meant a lot, but it wasn't just the game. It wasn't just about the game. So Luke's a pioneer. Andrew, Shane, these guys pioneered the sport here in Australia, and I guess if anything, I opened up a slightly different pathway to show that you didn't have to go to college. There were eyes on the NBL, and if you're good enough, I think the world's shrunk enough that you will be seen wherever you play.
I was listening to this, excuse me, guys. I was listening to this conversation on SEN this morning, and one thing, a question that came up, I don't know if you guys know much about this, but was what is it worth financially being picked in the draft like that? And the number 5 million was bantered around. What do you guys reckon? What's it worth?
Oh no, every pick has an allocated contract value, and the $5 million that was bandied around was the difference in LaMelo Ball's contract having gone number 3 to what he would have got at number 1. So it's a sliding scale. Number 1 earns more over the guaranteed contract. Number 30 is the last pick of the first round. They've got their number. The second you're drafted in the second round, nothing's guaranteed. You've got to go and earn your contract.
Yeah, so it's pretty valuable, but by contrast, it's actually, can you re-sign a contract after that guaranteed rookie contract? Because that's when the numbers escalate. So it's, like you said, Chris, hopefully Josh can be there for a few more years than you were, and then he's going to be doing just fine, hopefully a boomer of the future. Well, while we're on NBA, moving on from the draft, Chris, any insights from this week on what's brought with NBA trades and rumours? And the Warriors are going to need a retool as well. Very sadly, Klay Thompson coming back from an ACL has ruptured his Achilles on his other leg, so that's going to drastically change what the Warriors look like.
It will, and just you're heartbroken for someone that seems to be so widely respected and liked around the NBA. So terrible news for Klay and the Golden State Warriors. So much movement. Philadelphia have made big moves. They got rid of Al Horford. They brought in Seth Curry. They got rid of Josh Richardson. Bojan Bogdanovic. This could be the big one. There'd been a trade agreed to get him to Milwaukee alongside Giannis. Of course, they'd already brought in Drew Holiday, and Bogdanovic declined his extension. He's nominated to be a free agent, or an unrestricted free agent. So that trade's fallen down. And the big news isn't necessarily Bogdanovic, but does this affect Giannis's willingness to stay? That they're going to need to get another genuine perimeter threat, in my mind, to really make sure Giannis is happy. They're all chips in, but they need to be, because if Giannis leaves, they're all chips out. They might as well just cash him out. So watch this space with interest. Of course, the hope is Giannis stays. A few other big ones. Danny Green got to Philadelphia as well, was the other one. Chris Paul getting to Phoenix. He's going to be great for Devin Booker and that young crew. We will watch with interest to see where our own Aaron Baines lands. The interesting one, just minutes before, or in the hours before we recorded this, is that unfortunately the Detroit Pistons did not extend Thonmaker's contract, and so he's become a free agent. We hope, of course, that he has interest from other NBA teams, but he's been bounced around already. We hope that he remains in the NBA and doesn't fall out of it. But I do need to mention OKC and New Orleans. The job that their front officers have done in accumulating and stockpiling first-round draft picks has been incredible, and it will be fascinating to see either the young talent they bring in or the way they've positioned themselves to bring in an absolute superstar and can hand off a number of first-round picks. So it'll be really interesting to see what the OKC Thunder and New Orleans Pelicans do.
And just a little more on Thon there. Of course, we all hope he stays in the league, but Tokyo Olympics next year, NBL confirmed now to start in January. I'd be amazed if there weren't some savvy NBL clubs trying to find room and contact Thon Maker's people.
Oh, they should have. If they haven't all called him by now, that'd be crazy. You should at least make the call, even if you expect the answer to be no.
So guys, we are only 4 episodes deep. We are still brand spanking new, but it seems like we've actually accidentally got ourselves a reputation already for calling out stuff in the media or other that just isn't quite right for the WNBL season especially. So we got tagged in a tweet this week. Chris, what do you think? What do you make of this front page that's not quite right?
It's the front page. I'll get that. I don't know if Chris is seeing that there. It's the Adelaide Advertiser. Body Nod just called it out. They just miss him. He was an absolute foundation of the basketball media landscape, Australia-wide, but definitely in Adelaide. So him not being in the paper, he'd pick that up in a second. That was Nicole Seacamp, was captain of the Lightning last season. Nicole stepped away from basketball, though, which is sad in itself because she was an opal and a stud, but she's gone in a different direction in life. It's just sad to see on the newspaper that they're putting her on the front page when the Lightning have got plenty of other studs that really deserve the limelight.
And that's exactly it. I want to say again that the WNBL is one of the most elite women's basketball leagues in the world. We've already spoken about the collective bargaining agreement that the girls have signed. We need to, as a basketball population, as a community of supporters, and as a wider sporting media platform, give these girls the respect they deserve. We need to get their names right. We need to get their teams right. We need to get to know them as athletes. Simple as that. The Adelaide Advertiser are a huge newspaper in South Australia, the biggest one there, I believe.
Yeah, it's the only one.
I'll probably be told I'm wrong.
No, you're definitely right.
But it's front page. Get the players right. Give our girls the respect they deserve. Full stop.
And something that we said on our show this week made the media as well. We posted up a little something that Chris had said about Josh Giddey. Let's take a listen to what that was.
He is the best passer I have seen in the NBL since Darryl McDonald. Simple as that. He sees the floor great. We had LaMelo Ball last year, so I'll put him there as well. I think he's elite. To have an Aussie who's going to do the same thing, we're going to ride this journey with Josh Giddey with the Adelaide 36ers. Then we're going to sit back on draft day next year and Josh Giddey will go in the first round, potentially as a lottery pick. He's very special.
Machado just called. He said he was a pretty good passer as well. But I agree.
Josh Giddey's better. Josh, hang on.
Giddey is the better Australian.
Cut this one up. Josh Giddey is a better passer than Scott Machado, period.
Chris, I love that. And Wertho mentioned Scott Machado, and I want to throw in the mix too. Who are the other guys in the conversation there? What you're saying about Josh Giddey, you think about Cedric Jackson, maybe a flashback, Doug Overton as well. But talk us through that a bit more, because it's a long history of great passes in the NBL that you're putting him ahead of after one game.
There are, and I played with DMAC for 7 years. For 6 years, and I got to know his game inside out, and I was dependent on his game. He made me a much better player than a lot of other point guards would have allowed me to be. I coached Josh Giddey at the under-20 national championships, and we had a few sessions before he turned up because he was up at the COE or the NBA Global Academy up in Canberra, and so he joined us a little bit late. The second he set foot on the floor, it was a different basketball court to what it had been. And there were 2 or 3 passes that he made that there just aren't many basketball players in the world that can make it. He crossed over from right to left and took a hard dribble away from the basket on his left hand and threw a left-hand hook bullet pass to a corner shooter who did not even know he was open, hit him right on the numbers, and he lifted into his shot and knocked down a 3. And I just looked at the other assistant coaches. I thought, what was that? And it became such commonplace for Josh. He's got incredible vision of the court. He sees the game 2 or 3 passes ahead of where the ball is, which is a quality of most elite point guards, I understand. But the difference with Josh, and let's just stay with Scott Machado because he's current and he was one of the best passers, if not the best passer in the NBL last season. And I know if he listens, Scott, that I'm not saying this with any disrespect because I'm using you because you are, I believe, the best passing point guard in the NBL. But Josh Giddey's also 6'8". He can pass out of traps. He's got great length to throw bullet passes, two-hand passes out of traps, and he's going to see them. He can throw wraparound passes around the outside of defensive players as well. So that length just gives him another element that smaller point guards don't have. Even in speaking to one NBA scout, they're comparing him to Luka Doncic without that jump shot. They think he's that quality passer and has that quality court vision. Now, that's a very, very big mantle. And I'm not hanging my hat on that yet. I'm just telling you what one NBA scout said. But the NBA is very high on Josh. If he can develop a jump shot this year, and if Connor Henry gives him the license to then go and shoot that three-point shot in the games, Josh has still got another level to go to. So, yes, I absolutely stand by the fact that I think Josh Giddey is the best passer I've seen in the NBL since Darryl McDonald. And we all know what Darryl McDonald was what he was for the league when he got here. He was doing things that we'd never seen and maybe never considered. Josh Giddey will do the same thing.
And further to what you said before, Chris, this is about a kid that's grown up around the stadium. You tall point guards, you see Ben Simmons, who would have grown up watching NBL games and watching Darryl McDonald, and we know what Ben Simmons is doing. And Josh is the same. Izzy, your daughter now, is going on to great things in basketball, growing up at the stadium watching you. Josh has watched his dad, Wazza. His numbers retired by the Melbourne Tigers. But Wazza went on to work for Melbourne Tigers and now Melbourne United afterwards. I remember emceeing United games and Josh would harass me every game as a 10, 11, 12-year-old just because he wanted to be on the big screen. So he's watched the best of the best night in, night out, and that's where he's learned his craft. It's great to see him now get
Watch out, Nath. He might actually try and take your job in the future.
I think he'll be on the big screen plenty nowadays. I think he's definitely going to get his opportunity.
But you know the other thing, just to tie this up, is that Dave Simmons played nothing like Ben. Dave was an undersized 4'5" who was a bruiser. Warwick Giddey he was just a facilitator, didn't dribble the ball much, was the perfect complementary player to Gaze Copeland and Bradkey. But what they've both done as parents and what a lot of junior coaches don't do, they've got tall sons, clearly. They did not pigeonhole their kids to be 3 men, 4 men, or 5 men because they were both tall enough to be 4 men. They made sure they developed the skills required to become a guard because their dads knew what it took to become a pro. And it might not have made them the best junior players age by age, but they knew that it would make them the best possible player at the highest possible level in years to come. So also credit to Dave and credit to Woz for that.
Really quickly to wrap up this show, we're just going to have a quick look at what's coming up for this weekend's games. We've still got a whole bunch of games for round 2. We do have that one game postponed. Not sure yet if the broadcast schedule will change with the other game on Sunday. So let's keep our eyes on that. This one, the only game that really I'm kind of keen to see play out is that very first one. Hopefully, Bendigo finally get that first win. Let's see what will happen. But for now, we've got 4 games still this round. And then, of course, going straight into round 3. Would you believe that means we're a third of the way through the season already? Thank you so much, Chris Anstey, Nathan Strample, and I'm so sorry we missed Mark Worthington today, but it was great to have your daughter, Nathan, pop her head in a couple of times. So thank you to Emily for being our 4th today. And thank you so much for listening to us. We are Two Way Talk Podcast. Make sure you listen, share it with your friends, subscribe on iTunes, and make sure you're watching the WNBL because there's heaps more games to come. Have a great one.